What's going on, you guys? Back here today to go over some questions about this modded Power Mac G5 case and to do some system maintenance on it. And in case you don't know, this system is an AMD Threadripper 1950X. It has 64 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RGB RAM, 2 GTX 1080 Ti Founders Edition, all of it's water cooled with EK water cooling parts, blocks, and then an XSPC radiator. I have a 1000 watt Corsair power supply, and honestly it's been a great system up until I did that overclocking video where I tried to push it as far as I can and actually got #1 on TimeSpy Extreme for this processor and these graphics card combo. And the problem I'm having with it now is that it just keeps randomly hitting power spikes and shutting off the screen, shutting off the power to the graphics cards. So I think it has something to do with the liquid metal that I did the shunt mod on, drawing too much power for this 1000 watt power supply. But we're gonna tear it all apart and just do some normal water cooling system maintenance and kind of run over some questions that people have talked about in the other how to build a modded Power Mac G5 case to fit ATX parts series. Just a whole lot of questions that I've got about it, and we'll talk a little bit about how everything's held up in the almost year and a half that I've had this system together like this. So first things first, we're gonna pull the side panel off. And then because I planned to be able to maintain this system, I have this drain valve right here, and we are going to get a fitting and some soft tubing and connect that up and give us a system to drain from. So I've got my fitting here. I'm just gonna unthread this little end cap and thread this fitting on, connect my tube, and then I'm just gonna use an old water bottle to drain all this into. It doesn't drain very fast right when you open it up. You have to allow a place for air to come into the system. So I have this cap up here on my second GPU that I can just unthread a little bit and get a constant flow, and that will pretty much drain the entire system from the GPUs down to the CPUs, which that's all I really want to drain for now. With the loop drained, you can go ahead and take out this top fitting up here. It's kind of a snug fit, but it should work its way out. And then with that top fitting out, we can go ahead and cap both sides of the GPUs. Then we need to remove this next tube down here, which is a little bit trickier because it's a rigid tube, so and not on a swivel fitting, but we just want to make sure we don't spill any of this fluid out. So I'm going to put this paper towel under here just in case, and then going to remove this fitting and put another cap on. Now once that's capped, we can go ahead and twist this fitting or this tube down and out of the way and drain this excess fluid in here. And I just use paper towels to drain it into when it's inside the system. And then the same thing, we're just gonna remove this fitting and put a cap on. So the last tube we have to remove is this one here from the pump to the CPU. And we're just gonna take it out, and then we're gonna cap both sides. So start with this side because it'll have the least probability to leak. So I've got that swivel fitting off. Throw a cap on, a little bit of fluid on the outside of the CPU block. So we'll wipe that up. And now this side, I want to grab some paper towels and throw them above the power supply just so we don't get too much fluid in there. So just like that. And then we're going to remove the tube, which has quite a bit of fluid in it, of course. Get that out of the way. Same thing, we're gonna get this fitting all the way off and throw a cap on it. So now everything's pretty much isolated. The only tube left would be this one for the top of the radiator, and actually I'm going to take that off as well. So I've got another cap here, and just with how tight this is to the top, that makes it a little bit more challenging to remove, but shouldn't have any issues. And this will isolate pump and the radiator from everything else. So that way we don't have to drain any of that. Any other draining we do can be done outside the system. Now that we have the system laid down on its back, we're going to remove these cables here on the GPUs for power. And some of these are pretty tight with how they had to be run under the motherboard. We got those out of the way, and we can just go ahead and unscrew them for now. With those screws out, the trickiest part about removing these two GPUs at the same time is going to be getting both of these little latch mechanisms unhooked. So what I do is I use a screwdriver and I just pop it in there and hit the tab. Just to make this a little easier, I'm gonna remove my ram as well. Give me some more room to kind of fiddle with it in either direction. And both of these cards will come out as a unit, which I can't really show you, but with those out, we have access to the motherboard, and we are going to take off the CPU block as well, just to make sure we had good thermal paste application on here. Don't know why we wouldn't, but we'll see. You can also take apart the CPU block and clean it too. Alright, so CPU paste looked good. And that's the whole system. One of the questions that a lot of people ask me is how this motherboard is mounted in here. Is it sturdy? And let me tell you, I mean, it's had this full water-cooled system in here the entire time, and it hasn't had any issues. And that's 2 water-cooled GPUs and a water-cooled CPU with a huge block. And yeah, like, the weight doesn't affect the epoxy the way that people think it does. So ultimately, this is as far as the teardown needs to go, so this is where I'm gonna stop. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys right now, that really, like, the way that this system is put together, it's not coming apart. Now with these GPUs out of here, I can take them apart and cap them individually, so we have something that's a lot easier to work with. So let's do that right now. And then once we have these tubes off, we can, like I said, cap both of these 2 terminal slots independently with these extra caps that I have, and then we should be able to take the cards apart. And then making sure we just snug these caps down with this Allen wrench, just so we don't have any leak issues. We're going to do the same thing to this other card here and snug them down. Now I'm going to do this one at a time, but we're going to take the screws all out of this card, and we're just going to set them on this card so we know where they come from, and it'll be a quick, simple process here. So just take all the screws out so that we know exactly where they go. So now we can lift off this whole thing, and then what I like to do is just take these screws and drop them right back in where they go. So then when we set this to the side, we can still use our other GPU as a reference for where our screws go. So start with all these perimeter screws and then go into the screws right around the GPU. And remember, you want to loosen these GPU screws up evenly. These 2 screws right here, which are kind of a pain in the ass. And the final screws you have to take out are on this IO shield along here. So now that I have the card disassembled, we can see the 3 shunts that I put the liquid metal on. That's that one, and that one. And we're just gonna take some Q-tips and wipe that up as best we can. And if we need to, I have some acetone that I can put on a cotton ball and clear that off with. As it turns out, the Q-tips were not the greatest at removing the liquid metal, so we're going to try some acetone here and some paper towel, and that cleaned that right up. Okay, so we're just gonna do the same to all of this, and now that we have all 3 of these shunts cleaned off, we should be good to reapply some thermal paste and reassemble the card. Now that we have the full die covered in the thermal paste, we can go ahead and put the block back on. So I'm just going to flip this upside down. Actually, I'm going to flip the GPU upside down and make sure it's lined up. And then I'm going to start screwing everything in. So just put the screws back in the reverse order, and then do the same thing for the second card. And just a side note here, there is no shame at all in reconsulting your manual when you are putting a water block back together. So one thing worth mentioning while we're here is when the block is apart, you can look at the fins in this GPU. I literally just tore it apart and cleaned it when I did the shunt mod back in October, and I can look at these fins and tell you that they're not plugged up or anything, so I'm not going to worry about tearing the blocks apart and cleaning them out. They're a little stained, but I'm going to use the same fluid anyways, so not too big of a deal here. So now that both GPUs are reassembled, we can go ahead and put the cross tubes back between them. And now this whole assembly is done, so we can move this off to the side. Now that we have the CPU cleared off and ready to go, I am going to apply some thermal paste, and I'm going to do a big line down the middle and then a couple dots. Using a thermal paste spreader, I'm going to spread it out because full coverage on this Ryzen Threadripper chip is a lot harder than normal mainstream CPUs, so this is just the way that I like to do it on here. And now with our block on there, we're just going to go ahead and tighten in a cross pattern until the screws bottom out. And there we go, everything is back in place for the CPU, and now we can drop in the GPU assembly as a unit. Let's just go ahead and try to weasel these back in. Don't even really remember how I got them out. And then we can go ahead and screw them back in. Following screwing them back in, we can then plug in all the power connectors for them. Those two are pretty easy. It's these two that are not quite so easy, just because, like I said, there's a lot of stretch the way that these cables have to run behind the motherboard. So now we are ready to put tubes back in everything, so I guess we'll stand her back up. So starting with this top tube, because it's the hardest to really reach in and grab, and then we're just going to work our way down the whole system. Going to put some paper towels under it, make sure there's no drops hitting the power supply. If you saw me building my wife's computer, you know that I've already done that. Alright, so now that we have all the tubes installed, we are going to line this thing with some more paper towels and then do a leak test. So I did the leak test in a little bit of an unconventional way. Because I reused all these tubes, I wasn't too worried about it. Normally I would recommend you hook it up to a separate power supply so that you make sure that you don't have any leaks onto components that are drawing power that have current running through them. Yeah, this way I just knew that it would work because, like I said, it was just a reassembly, so I was a little willy-nilly about it, but I wouldn't recommend you do that. I've gone back into the BIOS, made sure everything was set up the same, and now I'm going to play some games and see if the black screen power shutdowns still happen. Well, after about an hour of gaming, I didn't close any background programs, running Chrome, eating memory, just using all kinds of power. I don't have any shutdowns, which normally I have to close Chrome and it turns into a big nightmare. So I'm glad that the problem was just that I needed to reduce some power load by removing the shunt mod, and hopefully I got some benefits too for thermals because I added in some new thermal paste on the GPUs and the CPUs. So yeah, I hope you guys like my little maintenance video, and if you have any questions about this system or anything like that, please don't be afraid to ask in the comments down below. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe to my channel to watch me grow. I'm over that 250 subscriber mark, so I'm super pumped, and yeah, I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.